be our third virtual town hall, convening the DD community in the time of COVID-19. I'll just remind you all that we're going to be recording this session. So to preserve good audio quality, to cut down on background noise and screen clutter, we're going to put your microphones all on mute. And I would ask you, please don't unmute yourself during the presentation. Again, just to keep background noise to a minimum. Don't be offended. It's more of a technical thing than anything else. During the presentation, if you have any kind of questions, we're going to do some housekeeping. But to get started, I wanted to introduce myself. I should be on video if that's all working. This is me before I had a beard. My name is Michael Brower. I'm an attorney with the Community Inclusion Team here at Disability Rights New Jersey. I'll be your MC for this afternoon.
Disability Rights, where are you?
Naomi, could I ask you to mute those microphones if you could?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you. That's no problem.
Gabby, are you in a meeting?
This webinar is put on jointly by several of our DD partners. But before we introduce those, I wanted to do a little bit of a plug. During the COVID-19 crisis, Disability Rights New Jersey has been busy. We've put a special website. The web address is up on your screen. It's drnj-covid.org, where you can get resources, updates on the activities that we've taken to advocate for the rights of people with disabilities during this crisis, the activities of our different teams. And again, there'll be valuable resources and links that will be helpful for you there, as well as upcoming events and some frequently asked questions. We're very happy to welcome this afternoon Dr. Kim Buxenbaum, the Director of the Office of Special Education, and Dominic Rota, Director of Special Education Policy and Dispute Resolution from the Department of Education. So we'll be welcoming them and we'll be hearing from them quite a bit later on. Also want to welcome our DD partners. Mercedes Witkowski from the Council on Developmental Disabilities is here. She's the Executive Director. Also happy to welcome Deborah Spitalnik from the Boggs Center on Developmental Disabilities. And Deborah actually had an update from a previous town hall on PPE. So if, Deborah, you can turn on your mic, I want to give you the chance to talk about that update real quick.
Thanks so much, Michael, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to our guests from DOE. One of the concerns that we've heard continuously through the community, and in fact also on our first joint DD network town hall, was concern about the difficulty, the importance of face masks to prevent the transmission of COVID, as well as the challenges for people with disabilities in being able to understand about wearing masks and to be able to tolerate masks. So the Boggs Center has taken on that quest, and our first products are listed here. These are face masks for that directions and support for children about wearing face masks. There's a parent's guide to helping your child wear a mask, help your child feel good and about using and seeing others wear masks, and then a more interactive social story about staying healthy when by wearing a mask, which also includes a coloring section where kids, if they can draw on what you've downloaded. Our next challenge is, which we are actively working on, is developing similar resources for adults. As the community begins to open up and we support the participation of people with disabilities, we know that being able to keep ourselves safe using masks is a priority. So we look forward to working with you. And again, thank you everyone for your input, including to the town hall that's helped guide us towards developing products to be of assistance. Thanks so much, Michael, and partners, for this opportunity to bring our greetings and share these resources.
Thanks, Deborah. It's always fantastic. The resources developed by the Bog Center are always top notch. Give you another recommendation to visit the website, which is up on the screen now. And we will be sharing the slides after the presentation so that you can visit it. You don't have to scribble it all down in a hurry. Also joining us on afternoon's webinar, Paul Aronson, the Ombudsman from the Office for Individuals with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities and their Family, and Christine Baker, the Associate Director, both on the webinar with us this afternoon. And finally, from Disability Rights New Jersey, my colleagues here, Gwen Orlowski, Executive Director, and Rebecca Shore, the Director of Legal Advocacy, also both on the webinar, along with some other Disability Rights New Jersey staff. Will be joining us here. Our contact information, just to make a little side trip. Obviously, we're going to be talking about all kinds of different issues. We like to keep these town halls as broad as possible to make sure that we're addressing the issues that are important. If you have an individual problem where you think you need legal assistance, you want to talk in a more confidential or private setting, the phone number for disability rights along with our website are up on the screen here. You can always call through our intake if you're looking for some special individualized assistance. Like I said, we want to hear from you. We want to hear about the concerns, the questions, things that are working well, things that are not. The best and easiest way for that to happen is to use the chat box that's built into Zoom. Normally, you'd look and see a bar either at the top or the bottom of your screen that would say chat. You can click that. It'll open up a window where you can type in a question. I prefer if you address your questions to everybody. That way, everybody can share and experience the thoughts and concerns that you have. If the chat button is not visible on your toolbar, you'll see 3 dots and the word more. Click on that. It'll give you a little drop-down panel, and that's where you'll find the chat button if the chat button is not appearing on your default panel. We know we've got some folks who are joining us by telephone. Because of the volume of folks we have on the call, we don't want to unmute mics. Again, that just creates a little bit of a cacophony of noise, and it becomes difficult to hear. So if you're on the phone, the best way for you to submit a question is to get to a computer and send us an email. That's questions@drnj.org. I've got another computer up in front of me, so I'll be monitoring that live as we go through. If you submit any questions to questions@drnj.org, I'll make sure that the panelists hear them so that we can address your question. With that, I want to turn over the microphone and the video feed to our guests from the Department of Education for them to introduce themselves and to give us a little bit of an update. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael. This is Dominic Rhoda, and I am the Director of the Office of Special Education Policy and Dispute Resolution at the NJDOE. And first, let me say that I hope this finds all of you safe and well during this time. And a special thanks again to DRNJ, to the Council, and to the Bog Center for organizing these types of gatherings and for inviting. I'm sorry, I just got muted.
I know you're doing your best, Walden. Are you following the steps that I showed you?
I'm doing my best to do that.
Is your clothes completely like dry?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Michael, can you mute everyone else?
Yeah, I would just ask the guests on the call if you could just double check your microphones, please, and mute yourself if you're not presenting. Thank you.
What about
So thank you everyone for the opportunity to spend a few, spend some time with you today. Kim and I and our colleagues
tomorrow, then you're
from
going
the
to do the ASL, right?
have been
and it's submit,
doing
right?
these types of calls.
How's your English?
Dominic, hang on 1 second for me. I'm sorry to cut in.
It's okay. It's no problem.
We got a lot of background noise, folks, so I would ask you all to please mute yourself. And Naomi, if you could help me out with a mute all on the crowd, that would be appreciated, including folks on the phone.
Well, you can contact your teacher tomorrow, okay? Because it's
Maybe.
an office hours, right? So you could do algebra, ASL, and gym, which should be very easy, right?
Yeah.
All right, they're having some technical difficulties. Hopefully, I will not have these difficulties.
Alrighty, so we've got everybody muted now. I think Dominic, you should be able to go ahead. I apologize.
Great, thank you. No problem. It's okay. This is the virtual world. So as I was saying, thank you to DRNJ, to the council, to the Boggs Center for having us. We look forward to interacting with all of you, and from hearing directly from you, I'm going to type in my email address in the chat box. It's important for Kim and I, as we do these types of events, to share some important information, from the department, but it's also important for us to hear from all of you. And Michael, you touched on that as well. We want to hear things that are not working, that are working, things that we might not be aware of. So please feel free to share, information and reach out for us. Kim and I have done these types of calls really since the beginning of this new world of telecommuting. And just for a little bit of background, our offices and the New Jersey Department of Education we've been fully operational through telecommuting since March 18th. And since that time, our colleagues in different offices at the department, as well as different departments throughout state government, including Paul and Christine at the Treasury Department, have been up and running, and we have been responding to lots of inquiries from the public, from parents, from school districts, trying to push out critical information concerning the delivery of special education and related services to students with disabilities, how that's done in this world of virtual and remote instruction during these unprecedented times, which have resulted in the prohibition of in-person instruction and in-person services from occurring. And so I think we're going to talk a little bit about some of the activities that we have undertaken, and some ideas we have for going forward. But before we get into that, Kim, do you want to add anything to that sort of general introduction?
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kim Buxenbaum. I am the director for the Office of Special Education, and Dominic and I work closely together. Our offices work closely together to make sure that we are hearing from all of you, from our educators, our teachers, administrators, parents, and families, and being as responsive as possible to everything that we're hearing. We know that this is, as Dominic said, an extremely challenging time. This is we are in a situation where none of us are used to having to be sequestered in our homes for this long, not able to go out and interact with others, not be able to have those social connections, and to have to now transition to a virtual education environment, which I think we can all agree, has been a bit of a bumpy road. I think we're all learning as we go. And we really look forward to continuing conversations and collaborations to ensure that we are meeting the needs as much as possible. As Dominic said, we've been collaborating with other agencies. We are working within our own Department of Education across our division of field services and academics and performance, early childhood, trying to make sure that we are all having conversations for all students, including our students with disabilities, and making sure that when we're developing our guidance, the needs around our students with disabilities are also being are also included in those discussions and in those guidance documents. We are also working across departments. So Dominic and I have had phone calls with folks from the Department of Health, from Department of Human Services. So we are really working hard to make sure that we are, pulling everybody together. This is a time where the more people that we can have collaborating together and coming out of our silos to be able to make sure we're having conversations and addressing as many needs as possible in a comprehensive way, the better. And so we've been working hard to try to do that. So we look forward to providing some information for you, as Dominic mentioned, and answering your questions today. And thank you again to all of our partners, Disability Rights New Jersey, the Council, Bog Center, for including us in these conversations. We're excited to be here.
Yeah, I think Kim, we'll start from the beginning. So early on, in early to mid-March, the U.S. Department of Education issued some guidance that made clear that school districts had the responsibility to implement student IEPs and to satisfy, FAPE obligations to the greatest extent possible. And then once the COVID pandemic, increased in size and scope and magnitude, we started to also push additional messaging out. And then obviously when we went to telecommuting, that changed a lot of our messaging. And what we have said is, there's an acknowledgement that, during this time period where in-person instruction and in-person services are not permitted because of aggressive social distancing measures to mitigate the spread of the virus, virtual and remote instruction is to be delivered. And at its April board meeting, the State Board of Education adopted emergency regulations that made clear that the delivery of special education and related services to students with disabilities during this period of the COVID global pandemic is permitted. And the delivery of those services through various virtual, remote, or online platforms to implement a student's IEP to the greatest extent possible was the expectation.
Yes.
And good.
Nope.
And so since that time, additional, and so with a couple of acknowledgements there that, first and foremost, virtual, remote, online instruction is not the same as in person. And that also there are certain services, especially certain related services, that cannot be provided virtually or remotely, and will have to, be considered once school buildings reopen and in-person instruction can resume.
Right. And I do think it's important to add, as Dominic's saying, we are not working in an ideal setting in terms of our educational delivery at this point. And so there have been a lot of fits and starts to this process. What things looked like when we, in the middle of March, when we first were told that we were going to stay home and we thought we'd be home for 2 weeks, that was one, set of direction that we would be able to have conversations about. But now that this is going on months, obviously we have to shift, and school districts and parents are having to shift in terms of making sure that instruction is being malleable as well with these changes that are happening on a regular basis as we're waiting for guidance from our public health officials. And so to that end, with hearing from the field, from parents and from educators, related service providers, about the challenges that there are in terms of delivery to services, certain related services, I'm sure, parents on our call are aware of, are easier to deliver in a virtual format than others. Counseling is a service that is something that's much easier in a lot of ways to deliver than maybe a physical therapy, where, that can usually necessitate some hands-on in a typical one-on-one setting. And so that has to look different. So that means that our students are not getting the services the same way that they would if they were in person. So one of the things that Dominic and I have done is we just held a meeting a couple of days ago with the respective disciplines of these related services. So the state organizations for physical therapy, for school psychologists, speech and language therapists, in order to start to have conversations about what are they hearing from their providers, their constituents, in terms of the challenges, and how can we collaborate together in order to, I'm sorry, I'm hearing some feedback. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Kim.
Okay. So in order to start to work with the experts of those disciplines to be able to come up with some guidance around what are some ways and suggestions to help be able to deliver these related services to the best abilities possible within this virtual setting. So, you know, the conversations are important. It's important that we are, you know, talking to, we are also in conversations right now with some folks at DDD to talk about these transition pieces and, you know, our adult students. I know we have a number of parents on the call that probably have children that are going to be graduating or aging out by June 30th, 2020. And so we're trying to have conversations with DDD to talk about what does this look like now in this new, you know, unprecedented situation that we're in this virtual reality and in this reality of social distancing, where our students who, you know, their primary goals and objectives in their IEPs may have been based around community-based instruction, for example, but that can't happen because we're not allowed to go out into the community and be able to participate in the community and in work sites. So those are things that we're trying to have conversations with folks about in order to be able to figure out what kind of guidance we can give that will be accurate and that will also be in line with the federal obligations that we are under. So as everybody on the call, I'm sure knows, you know, the IDEA, which is our federal overarching regulations and law that guides all of the delivery of special education and related services, is something that we have to go with. So the federal government has determined that you know, we need to continue to provide all of our free and appropriate public education to the best extent possible, to follow the core tenets of the IDEA, which means that we as a state are working to make sure that our locals are following to the best of their ability, with the understanding, and the federal government has also said that there is an understanding that that the IEP related services and goals and objectives and programming is to be delivered to the greatest extent possible, understanding that there are certain pieces that will not be able to be delivered because we are not in an in-person environment at this point. So this makes it challenging for everybody, challenging for the parents who have their students home with them and are taking on the role of teacher and parent, and maybe telecommuting or having to go out because they are a first responder or considered an essential employee, and having to go out to work every day and navigate having, you know, sometimes one child and sometimes multiple children of various ages at home. We appreciate that also our teachers are in similar situations with that as well. So.
Yeah, and Kim, that's a really good point. That the piece about the communication and the important role that parents and guardians play is really a message that we have been trying to drive home, because, you know, parents and guardians are key members of students' IEP teams, right? And so when you're thinking about what's going to happen when school buildings reopen, and there are conversations about, you know, compensatory services or conversations about, you know, ESY services, it's going to be those IEP teams that make those determinations. And we are messaging, you know, folks from SPAN who are on the call can attest to this. We're messaging to parents, to parent groups, and to school districts, and directly to, you know, down to special ed directors. Have your teams, have your case managers stay in good and regular contact with parents during this time, to do regular check-ins, whether it's regular check-ins to ensure that the technology is working, regular check-ins just for for progress monitoring, regular check-ins to see if there are some additional modifications or changes to the delivery of services. We mentioned how we went from being in a brick and mortar school setting on a Friday or a Monday, depending on where you were in New Jersey, to going to virtual or remote on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Those weren't IEP team change of placement determinations. This is, I know that the term home instruction has been thrown out there, but in our world, that means something very specific. This is, this is being on remote or virtual instruction because you can't be in a school building. And so we have, to the extent that we can, and we're doing it here again today, is ensuring that there are good communication strategies between school districts and families when it comes to providing services to students at this time.
And I would also say that, we are also messaging to all of those same groups that districts do still have an obligation to implement the IEPs of the student to the greatest extent possible, even during these mandated school closures due to our public health emergency and crisis and the multiple executive orders from the governor with this extreme social distancing and mandating that. When schools reopen, those IEP teams are going to need to meet to be able to make individual decisions about what types of services a student may need because they had missed or because the instruction was not happening the same way. So that means those conversations, and we know, and that depending on the nature of the disabling condition that students have, what that potential regression or need for compensatory services is going to look very different. It's also going to look different based on the districts and how they're delivering the virtual instruction and the virtual related services, how an individual student is responding to the virtual instruction and to the virtual related services. So those really need to be decisions at the table with the parents and the school educational professionals together, talking to determine what really needs to happen once we're allowed back into the brick and mortar scenario where we can do in-person instruction.
And one other piece of that, though, that we made clear in a broadcast message that went out, I guess about a week and a half ago, when concerning parental involvement and communication, we made clear to school districts that requiring parents to sign waivers or to give prior written consent before the delivery of services and waive away certain present or future claims or rights was not permitted. And that message went out, I guess maybe about 2 weeks ago now.
Yes.
And so if we are asking we're asking folks that if there are instances where that's happening to please let us know, because that is not permitted by the IDEA, nor is it permitted, under New Jersey special education regulations.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. No, go.
The other piece that we're looking at right now, we know that school is closed up until June 30th, 2020. We do not yet know what's going to be happening for the summer. That is, I think, anxiety provoking for all of us, but especially for our parents who are going to be looking at students who, had in their IEPs extended school year services, which, very likely many of our parents on this call may have that in those IEPs. And now what does that look like? And so that is an open question. We do not yet have the answer to that because we're following the guidance of the public health medical professionals and from the governor's office. And so I know that those are conversations that are happening on a daily basis. And so we're waiting to hear what summer school, is summer school going to be in session or not? And what we are messaging out to our districts is to plan for continued virtual and remote instruction, and for the possibility of in-person, and potentially some kind of combination, because we do know that there are going to be students who are not going to be able to transition from a Monday virtual instruction to a Tuesday in-person back in school. We have students who are medically fragile, whose parents may determine that for their health and safety, they're not ready to return them to school. We know that there are issues about what do we do with our students around the personal protection, and social distancing pieces. And so, the information that Dr. Spitalnik shared earlier from the Bog Center about how to wear a mask is very timely, very relevant. And we, the Department of Ed, we'll be putting and making that information available on our website as well, because that's something that's really important for our parents and our educators. And so these conversations are happening on a regular basis. We're trying to make decisions in line with what is happening from a public health standpoint.
Or something.
And
it sounded hard to breathe in the mask. So she cut like a small hole like this.
Did I get unmuted?
And so, okay, Dominic, did you want to share something?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, no, again, finish your thought and then I'll jump in about ESY. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, so just that we are trying to make decisions in line with what is coming out from our public health officials, because obviously, the health and safety of all is priority. And we are trying to respond with coming out with guidance around these different issues. We're working on, Dominic's office and my office right now is working on guidance documents around extended school year, compensatory education, all of those pieces. And so we're hoping to get those out, and we're doing that in conjunction with what we know the landscape is right now from a public health standpoint.
Right, and just along those lines of some of the messaging that we're getting out there, we know that this pandemic occurred, during high IEP season, and so we know that some IEP teams, prior to the aggressive social distancing measures being implemented, had already made determinations about students and about the need for ESY services for those students. We also know that a lot of IEP meetings that, were scheduled for March, April, and May, either haven't happened yet or will be happening virtually, or maybe happening once, in-person operations resume. But we're also encouraging, districts to consider the impact of the virtual instruction for students who weren't previously identified for ESY services. And again, going back to that idea of staying in regular communication and progress monitoring and capturing as much information and data as you can to figure out the needs of those individual students, both before, during, and after this period. And I think, a lot of that thinking goes in line where I think we're going to head next, and that is determining the need for compensatory services.
And that's a great topic. We've got a couple of questions on compensatory services. And Dominic, one other question that came in the chat that I want to kind of throw out there to you, maybe you can take a look at this one, is what could parents do if a district is pushing for an exit IEP despite a student's, presumed ongoing need and some parent concerns? Any suggestions or guidance for?
When you say an exit IEP for graduating or for, I'm sorry, I don't see the question.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at the Zachary Sena Cash's question in the chat box. And the question reads just like this: what can parents do when a district is pushing for an exit IEP meeting despite the student's need and a parent's raising concerns? So yeah, presumably that would be a graduation IEP.
So issues surrounding graduation, well, a couple things. So graduation is technically considered a change of placement and would require proper notice. And would require changes to the IEP. And so, that can be done a couple of different ways. That can be done through a virtual IEP meeting to really figure out what where the student progress is, before and during this COVID period. If the parties cannot work together to figure out if additional programming or another year is agreed upon, that can be a dispute that is filed with my office and ultimately determined by an administrative law judge. And one step before that would be a mediation conference. My office is where the mediators, the dispute resolution function is in my office, and our special education mediators are conducting virtual mediation conferences every day. We're also offering facilitated IEP meetings for families that are interested. But if it's a specific issue about graduation, this is that time of year, and so I would suggest asking for a meeting, and if a virtual IEP meeting can't happen, then reaching out to our office to see what other forums would be available.
Great, that's a fantastic answer. Thanks for laying that process out there for everybody.
Thank you. Kim, do you want to talk a little bit more about the comp ed stuff?
Yep.
Or?
Oh, you read my mind,
yeah,
Dominic.
I thought so.
So in terms of compensatory education, that is something that has a very specific definition in our world. It is compensatory education that is an individualized determination of whether a student requires some type of compensatory education due to services not being provided, or a student not receiving a free and appropriate public education, right? So if a student, and typically those decisions get made, well, unfortunately, typically those comp ed decisions get made if there's a disagreement between the parents and the district, and Dom's office has to get involved, which we like when that doesn't happen. So what we're trying to do is give some suggestions and message out that it becomes really important to take as much data as possible. That means making sure that we are monitoring those goals and objectives, however they're getting delivered to the best way possible in this period of virtual and remote instruction, to be able to measure a student's progress and or lack thereof, and the amount of progress and or regression that's occurring. And then once schools are back in session, again, getting the teams together to have those conversations, parents and school professionals at the table, to determine, is compensatory education required, and what does that look like? How much? In what manner should it be delivered? And so those, again, are individual determinations by individual IEP teams based specifically on a student's disabling condition and how they were able to engage in, access, and or take advantage of the instruction and the related services as they're being delivered right now. So those, again, are individualized determinations based on individual student needs and the specifics around that, how the instruction was delivered, how it was received, and what progress or not a student made.
Yeah, and the other piece of that too is another important message that we're getting out there is keeping good records, right, for both districts and for parents. Logging services that are provided, logging services that are missed, and really having a good record of activity during this period, because that information will also help the team make determinations about whether it's ESY or compensatory services.
And I will also say that, that children who have aged out are entitled to receive compensatory services if they did not receive FAPE during their time in school. And Dominic can talk maybe a little bit more about that, because that's a legal, typically it's around case law and legal determination. But because a student is graduating does not necessarily mean that they are not entitled to compensatory services if it's determined that they were not provided a free and appropriate public education.
That's correct. The delivery or the provision of compensatory services were in a like a due process hearing setting,
Right.
results from a finding that a student was denied a FAPE. But what we are doing before we get to that, because as you might imagine, we do not want to have a situation where we have hundreds of filings about whether or not FAPE was provided. Now, certainly I'm not suggesting that we want to short circuit anyone's procedural rights to file disputes. That's not what I'm saying, please. And I know this is being recorded, so I'll repeat that. But what we're trying to do is be proactive to prevent that from happening. And what we're looking at to see what kinds of flexibilities districts, would have or could have for that, for lots of different reasons, but including, that specific group of students and population of students who would be aging out. So we are working with our partners, both within state government and at the federal level, to see what other kinds of information we can put out there for those types of services. But to answer the direct question, if you do age out, you are still eligible to receive compensatory services.
All right, this is Michael. I want to throw a slightly different topic. It's a question that came in through the chat. And it's more of a prospective question, maybe not necessarily ripe for an answer, but I'll let you guys take a shot at it. Has the DOE put any thought into when school does go back into the physical buildings? Have there been any thoughts put into the more medically fragile students who may not be ready to be part of that first wave of going back to school in person?
So I'll take a stab at that one. The answer is yes, we are being thoughtful. We are thinking about that, and we're having conversations. We're having conversations at the county level with our executive county superintendents who are talking to their superintendents of districts to talk about what a blended or a scaffolded or staggered type of transition back to school might be, understanding that there may be certain there are certain populations of students that may not be able and or ready to safely return to school. And that's where I was talking earlier about, even around the conversation with extended school year, the same may wind up needing to apply to once school reopens in September, depending on how long we remain under these very strict social distancing mandates that we have. So there are conversations, and again, those are conversations that we're encouraging our local districts to start thinking about and trying to plan for now. What would a return look like if you had students that still needed some remote or virtual instruction and service provision because they're not yet ready to go back into school, and to start having those conversations now. For our students, particularly because you mentioned medically fragile, who are medically fragile, it's, those are conversations also with the medical health, your medical doctors, about what would a safe return need to look like from a standpoint of social distancing and the PPE, personal protective equipment, right? And having those conversations with your case managers and your child study teams now and your districts now about trying to be thoughtful of what are some things that we can start to put in place, or how can we start to come up with some benchmarks or some guidelines to know when will my child or my student be ready to return to school, and what needs to happen to help that process. For instance, we have students that are on the autism spectrum, and students who are not on the autism spectrum, quite frankly, that have sensory issues, and wearing a face mask will be a challenge for them. So that's why having resources like the Bog Center has just put out becomes very helpful, and for districts and parents to look at, to start to think about, how do I start to help my student or my child learn how to tolerate having a face mask on, so they can re-enter school? And what does that process need to look like? And what are some things that I can work with my district now on in preparation for that, through the OT or the PT services, or whatever, through the special education teacher, whatever that instruction's looking like.
Right, and those conversations about how to communicate and how to message effective social distancing measures for young children, whether it's on a school bus or on the recess playground, those are all conversations that are happening at the department, and that we continue and our colleagues continue to raise for consideration for when the public health professionals, because again, these are going to be decisions that are made by a whole host of folks, especially the governor, but also in consultation with public health agencies at the state and local level, with district boards of education, based on the public health, aspect of this.
Great. All right. I'm glad that thought is going in now. Nothing like good planning to try to address problems like this. Everything is unexpected, it seems like. The more you can plan, the less traumatic some of these experiences can be as we change from position to position here. I want to throw out, these are some questions that we've gotten in at questions@drnj.org. And don't forget, if you don't have access to the chat box because you're not on Zoom, you can always send questions there to questions@drnj.org. These are a little different. These are a little bit wider topic, not necessarily education specific. So feel free to continue putting questions in that are education specific, but we have some other folks from the DD partners that maybe could talk about some of these questions. We've gotten a question about whether or not the Department of Health has put out any kind of guidance for medical rationing. This is something I know DRNJ has addressed. I don't know if Gwen or Rebecca wants to address this, or I can also do it if you guys want to pass the buck.
Thanks, Michael. This is Gwen, and welcome everybody to the webinar. The DD partners, along with DRNJ, did advocacy around medical rationing back in late March and early April. And that did lead to the Department of Health issuing a policy on critical care allocation. And that policy is on our drnj-covid.org website. It's a complicated policy and probably beyond the scope of this presentation, especially given the amount of time that's left. But I do want folks to know that we raised some concerns with that policy. We were appreciative that the Department of Health responded to the advocacy and came up with a policy, which is based upon a policy out of the University of Pittsburgh. But we still think that that policy can have a discriminatory impact on individuals with disability in its application. And so we've continued to do some advocacy around that to try and get some changes, and we will continue to do so. The good news is, at least for now and hopefully going forward, we never reached a point of a critical shortage of some of that medical equipment, for example, ventilators. And so I don't believe that the policy had to be triggered at any hospitals. Michael, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, yeah, I would definitely steer folks to the drnj-covid.org website to read a little bit more. If they want to see the policy that's out there, they can be linked and see some of the advocacy and the concerns that we've issued around that. So thank you, Gwen. I appreciate you answering that question. I have another kind of, it's more of I've distilled a few questions down, and both Kim and Dominic have addressed this a little bit. But there's been some questions that have come in about the transition from special education services to adult services in, for example, somebody who would transition to DDD services as an adult. I know there's been some talk of extra information going out. I don't know if Mercedes, perhaps you have information to share there from the council?
Yeah, just finding the unmute button. I'm also trying to post in the chat the link, but DDD does have an announcement and a webinar that they are holding on Tuesday, May 19th from 1 to 3 p.m. on transitioning into adulthood for students who are aging out of their school entitlement. So I will try to get that link up in the chat in a few minutes, and we'll make sure that we share that with any of you who were on the call today.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Mercedes.
Michael, this is Rebecca Shore. I'm going to try to speak quickly because wouldn't you know it, my line guys just showed up right now and they're making a huge amount of noise outside my window. But I did want, I want to thank Dominic for everything that you said about compensatory education and for your office's willingness to try to mediate disputes. But I did want to make sure that parents are aware that when they get the notice of graduation, there is a deadline by which they would have to seek a due process hearing in order to preserve the rights of the student who's about to graduate if they want to get compensatory education. And I completely agree that if something can be worked out amicably, that's the way to go. But people need to know that there are deadlines. And so if it can't be worked out, sometimes there's no choice but to file for a due process hearing.
Right, and I would just add that, and again, not that that we would encourage this, but we have in the past have gotten requests for emergency hearings, the day of or the morning of graduation ceremonies, and we will certainly process those. And I myself have hunted down judges to get proceedings over the phone, and we'll certainly do that again. But to the extent that we can be proactive, well ahead of that, we would welcome that. So thank you for clarifying that.
And if I can jump in and do a little plug for Dom's office, I know that they are holding virtual, I think you got a request for virtual facilitated IEP.
We did, we've got our first request for a facilitated IEP to be done virtually. And also, I don't remember if I mentioned it, but at the Office of Administrative Law, they're doing virtual due process hearings as well, settlement conferences and actual hearings. So, and I think it just goes back to, I think we talked about this about, for Kim and I, our partners in state government, you have, Paul and Christine on the line here. Paul is an ombudsman. We have a special education ombudsman. Our offices overlap a lot for students and for families. And so we'll continue to work with and to partner up with as many individuals and entities as we can to make sure that, we're fulfilling our obligations and, doing right by kids, right, Kim? And
right, that's right. Right. I always like to say, and when I worked in the field, I would always say, keep the student at the center of the conversation and, and what's best for that student. And 9 out of 10 times, maybe I'm a little optimistic, maybe it's 8, but I like to go with 9 out of 10 times, the adults can usually, as long as we're all focused on doing what's right for the student and being willing to collaborate and compromise where appropriate, then we can have good results for kids. So that is the goal and what we are trying to message out far and wide.
All right, I'm just taking a look at the clock and I see on the official time, it is 4 minutes to 4 p.m. So it's time for us to start wrapping up. On my part, I just wanted to thank all of the guests, both from the Department of Education, from the Boggs Center, from the New Jersey Council on Developmental Disabilities, and my colleagues at Disability Rights New Jersey. And of course, none of this would mean anything if we didn't have all the participants, you guys, the parents, the advocates, the students who are watching this from home, either on the phone or over the web. So I really want to thank everybody for taking some time out. Even though we're all at home, we're all busy. It's a crazy new world that we're living in, so thank you. I wanted to let you all know that we do have an upcoming town hall scheduled for May the 28th. This invitation went out same time, 3 p.m., and we're going to be talking about the children's system of care. So related but distinct topics. So if you're interested in the children's system of care, we're going to be welcoming a guest from state government there at the Department of Children and Families. Using the same web address for any kind of questions. Feel free to send questions on that particular topic or any other topic that you're interested in hearing about so that we can try to hunt down the appropriate guests, the right information, and help bring everybody together while we're all doing social distancing. With that, if there's any final thoughts from the Department of Education guests.
I just wanted to say thank you again, and thank you to the council, to DRNJ, to the Boggs Center, to all the participants, to all of the, for those of you who have heard a lot of our message, we apologize for the reruns, but it's important to get this information out. And the one thing about Kim and I, we're nothing if not accessible. So if you have questions, concerns, if you invite us, we tend to show up. So thank you for having us, and stay well and stay safe.
Yes, thank you very much. I echo Dominic's great closing remarks there. And I really appreciate this opportunity. And, I know to all the parents out there that you guys are working really, really hard to fulfill multiple hats and multiple roles. And so thank you for everything that you do for our children. And please continue to keep in touch and let us know how we can help. And for those young adult students that have joined us today, thank you also for being on and advocating for yourselves, and feel free to reach out to us as well. Thank you.
And thank you, Michael, for being an excellent executive producer and MC. Excellent.
Thank you, Michael.
Of course, I'm happy to do it. I just want to do one final bit of advertising. There's been a few questions that I want to make sure we let everybody know. We did record this session. We'll be posting it on YouTube. I want to thank Naomi, who's on the webinar with us, who's been kind of steering the behind the scenes, making sure people have access, get them in the front door. And we'll be posting this up on New Jersey's Assistive Technology Center YouTube channel. A link will go out to anybody who registered or who's on the webinar, so don't worry, you won't be able to miss it. And it will also go up on DRNJ's website, along with our COVID-specific website, which is drnj-covid.org. One last plug there. I want to thank everyone one last time. Please stay well, stay safe. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.